to a program sponsored by the University of San Francisco's Center for the Pacific Rim and the University of San Francisco's Economics Department. This is the annual, if you wish, Wu Lecture. We're going to change the name, but for right now, I've got that memorized. Professor Wu taught on this campus in the Econ Department. He then moved on to a small institution down on the peninsula known as the Hoover. And then he moved all the way across this country to serve in the Reagan administration. He had a distinguished career, and his family decided to honor him by endowing this lectureship. His daughter is with us tonight. Thank you, Suzanne. A number of the faculty are here from econ and politics, And our director of the Center of the Pacific Rim is here also, Angelina E. Now, our guest tonight is an unbelievably talented economist. And all I can say is that when I went through Berkeley to get my Ph.D., I avoided that department like the plague, thinking of it as the most dismal of sciences, until I began to meet a few people who could actually write and study the things I like Professor Greg Grossman, who was a wonderful economist of the Soviet years. But I have found that they at least have hired somebody who I can read, and his name is Barry Eichengreen. And his recent book is a marvel. As I read through it, I had met him once before, and I realized he loved films as much as I do, and he has a sense of humor. And so it was a delight to read all 200 pages, if you can imagine an academic getting it all in 200 pages. It's a wonderful sense of humor, but a great deal of knowledge. And I began to think to myself, the person this reminds me of was in the 1960s and 70s when I read John Kenneth Galbraith, books like The New Industrial State, The Affluent Society. And Barry, who thinks also highly of John, and will not agree with me, but I think he is as good, if not better. So now, I give you, ladies and gentlemen, from the University of California, Berkeley, Professor Barry Eichengreen.
So, thank you very much to Patrick Hatcher. If you didn't know before that there was such a thing as an economist with a sense of humor, you know this now. Thank you to the Wu family for endowing the lectureship, and to USF. I had the pleasure of speaking here a couple of years ago, and it's very nice to be back. My topic this afternoon, this evening, is the dollar, a topic that everyone in the audience has a stake in, and no doubt has opinions about as well. As we meet here tonight, the dollar is back in the news again, and not all that news is good. Officials in emerging markets in other countries are worried about Federal Reserve policy. They complain about the Fed's second round of quantitative easing and worry that our central bank is engaged in a conscious policy of trying to debase or devalue the dollar. People are growing more worried again about inflation, what with oil prices and commodity prices rising. There are worries about trillion-dollar budget deficits stretching as far as the eye can see, raising at least the possibility that the Fed may consciously or subconsciously deal with that debt by inflating it away. And then there's the high price of gold, which signals, how should I put it politely, less than full confidence in the dollar. So I don't entirely intend to or have to play dismal scientist. The bright side, if you will, is that other currencies like the euro, have serious problems of their own. And the dollar has something else going for it. The dollar has the exorbitant privilege that it's not only our currency, but the world's. So that's what my book, Exorbitant Privilege, that I'm going to talk about tonight, is all about. The phrase was coined, depending on who you believe, by French President Charles de Gaulle in the 1960s, by his then finance minister, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, or by their economic advisor, Jacques Rueff. But they all had the same thing in mind, that the United States and its exporters and its companies had an unfair advantage by virtue of the fact that the dollar is not only used in the United States, but it's used globally, that it's not only our currency, but the world's. So let me give you a couple of numbers. This is, after all, a talk by an economist designed to illustrate the truly remarkable extent to which the dollar is the world's currency. About 3 weeks ago, the Bank for International Settlements, the central bankers' bank in Basel, Switzerland, released the results of its latest triannual survey of foreign exchange markets. So they do, the BIS does extensive surveys of foreign exchange traders and financial institutions every 3 years, and they confirmed that fully 85% of all foreign exchange transactions worldwide involve the dollar. The dollar is one of the two currencies involved in 85% of foreign exchange transactions. So 99% of all foreign currency transactions involving the South Korean won have dollars on the other side. Fully 99% of all foreign exchange transactions involving the Chilean peso are trades of Chilean pesos for dollars. So if you've been to South Korea in the last few years, you will have noticed that Montes Alpha, the leading Chilean wine, is the #1 wine in South Korea because there's a Korean-Chilean free trade agreement. So the Chilean wine gets in, unlike California wine, duty-free. But when a South Korean wholesaler wants to import wine from Chile, he buys dollars and not Chilean pesos and uses the dollars to pay the Chilean exporter. The dollar is the go-to currency for international transactions. Fully 61% of all the foreign exchange reserves, all the foreign currency reserves held by central banks and governments around the world are in dollars. I give other examples of this exorbitant privilege in the book. When Somali pirates ransom a ship, they demand that the ransom money be parachuted to them in dollars. When Iran gives President Karzai's people bags full of money, the money in question is in dollars. So actually, I would argue this is not an entirely unmixed blessing for the United States, because foreigners need dollars in order to finance their international transactions, because foreign central banks and governments want to accumulate dollars as insurance. They can use them in the event of financial shocks. They're willing to lend to us Americans, in order to acquire those dollars. If we in the United States are prone to excesses, for example, engaging in frenzied real estate speculation, they willingly give us more rope by purchasing the securities of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. One factor contributing to the financial crisis through which we have just passed, in other words, is the dollar's exorbitant privilege and the unusually low interest rates that prevailed between 2003 and 2006, which were partly a reflection of the exceptional willingness of foreigners to lend to us in order to accumulate our treasury securities. That was a factor contributing to the crisis. Now, of course, we in the United States have learned the error of our ways. We, Americans, are saving more, but because we're saving more and spending less, we need a weaker dollar exchange rate so that we can export more, so that we can achieve President Obama's stated goal of doubling U.S. exports in 5 years. But we find it hard to obtain that somewhat weaker dollar exchange rate because other countries, using the dollar as their lodestar, as the reference point for all their international transactions, continue to peg their currencies to the dollar. From our point of view, then, it means I think that the dollar's exorbitant privilege is as much a burden as it is a blessing. So how did we get into this peculiar situation in the first place? The dollar really achieved its position of international preeminence after World War II, right after World War II, when the U.S. was, to a first approximation, the only economy standing. So for a brief period after World War II, the United States accounted for nearly half of global industrial production. We were far and away the leading exporting country. Only the U.S. had deep and liquid financial markets open to the residents of the rest of the world. And in that kind of situation, it made perfect sense for firms and households and banks and governments around the world to do their international business in dollars. The subsequent 50 years obviously have seen important changes in the world economy, as first Europe and Japan rebuilt their war-torn economies, and more recently China and the BRICS and a variety of emerging markets have been growing robustly. So we now live in a more multipolar global economy, but we don't have a more multipolar global financial system. The global financial system is still dollar-centric, dollar-dominated. And again, if you want my reading on the causes of the recent financial crisis, one of them is this imbalance between what is now a more multipolar, less US-centric real economy and still a heavily dollar-dominated international financial system. So why has there been no commensurate decline in the relative importance of the dollar? I think the answer is the advantages of incumbency. Incumbency is an advantage for a politician seeking to hold on to elected office. Incumbency is an advantage for the dominant international currency. So take the example of a company exporting its goods. That company will quote the price of what it's selling in dollars because other companies quote the prices of what they sell in dollars, and that's the unit that everybody around the world is used to looking at when they seek to compare the products of different exporters. With everybody else quoting prices in dollars, it makes sense for you as an exporter, wherever you are located, to similarly quote prices in dollars and to continue doing so. With everyone else buying, selling, and holding dollars, it similarly pays to buy, sell, and hold dollars because the markets in dollar-denominated assets will be the most liquid. Economists have a name for this kind of situation. It's a situation or a market characterized by network externalities, where it pays to do the same thing as everybody else in your network, to adopt the same standard as everybody else in your network. And economists have shown, I think, pretty convincingly that situations characterized by these network effects tend to display high levels of persistence. Once a standard is widely adopted, it tends to get locked in. Or so it is said. I now want to suggest that this presumption is no longer valid. The notion that importers, exporters, and others will all want to use the same unit as other importers and exporters in order to avoid confusing their customers, holds less weight in a world where everybody carries a device in their pocket called a smartphone that can be used to compare currency values in real time. So we live in a world where currency converter is one of the 10 most downloaded widgets at the Apple App Store. The cost of switching and using currencies other than the dollar is declining with time because technology is changing. So even if the costs of switching and interchangeability were high once upon a time, this is no longer the case. Once upon a time, it was said similarly that there was room for only one operating system for personal computers because of high switching and interchangeability costs. Unless you were a dedicated computer hobbyist, if instead you were a businessman or woman, and you really were interested in exchanging data with your coworkers, you had to use Windows because everybody else had to use Windows. Everybody else used it. Everyone else on your network did so. And that tended to lock in this standard over time. We know now that technologies change over time and can become more open and flexible. In the case of personal computers, now we have operating standards from Microsoft, from Apple, from Google, from Linux. They all share the market. And so I think it will be in the case of international finance. Once upon a time, decades ago, there was room for only one international currency, the dollar. But now, because technology has changed, there will be room for several international currencies. So I think we're heading toward a world in which several currencies will share the international stage. I think further that this change is to be welcomed, not feared, that our economy, our global economy, will be more stable and smoothly functioning if there's a better match between the multipolar real economy and the multipolar international financial system that is coming. So what currencies specifically do I mean? I attach the highest probability to three playing a significant international role: the dollar, the euro, and the Chinese renminbi. So here I see a few people in the audience beginning to whisper to their neighbors. You're raising your eyebrows and expressing doubts about that one of these currencies will really be ready for prime time anytime soon. The problem being that different people are expressing doubts about different ones of the three. So it's clear, I think, that pessimism at the moment is most pervasive about the euro. A significant part of the euro area is in crisis. It's not clear that the crisis countries will be able to recover without reintroducing their own currencies so they can devalue and grow their exports. Keeping them in the euro area would require massive transfers to them from Germany, and it's far from clear that German voters would go from that.